But first, the more we see of Victoria's management of this pandemic, the more it looks like an episode of Yes Minister, or God forbid even Fawlty Towers. You'd laugh about it, wouldn't you? If it hadn't cost 729 Victorians their lives and millions of others their livelihoods. Today we had Brett Sutton, Victoria's Chief Health Officer, before the hotel quarantine inquiry. He thought he should have had the position of State Controller for the pandemic. Fair enough too. It's a health emergency first, we're told, first and foremost. But no, Victoria's Labor government, would you believe, through a deputy department, deputy secretary, or some sort of faceless bureaucrat, thought that two people should be in charge. And we all know, don't we, that when two people are in charge, no one's in charge. No one's in charge. Indeed, Sutton called the whole public service operation a large beast where it seems everyone was involved, but now no one was taking responsibility. I've been around government long enough to have an expectation that on these really big complex issues, something will sometimes go wrong. No large beast, as Sutton calls it, will always get it right all of the time. A good case in point is stopping the boats. Back when I worked for the PM, along the way, things didn't work. So we tried again, came at it another way, and the results are there. But I've never seen failure like this on every single level. Daniel Andrews might have gotten away with getting one thing wrong, say one of the quarantine hotels having some issues, but it was all of them. Not an occasional COVID test taking days, but thousands of tests. Tracing being so bad that even months later they're still operating via paper and fax machines. Modelling that was supposed to be for a roadmap to recovery that now even the modellers want redone. And then the curfew, that no one who's supposed to be an expert says that they advised it to be put in place at all. This isn't a government that's got one thing wrong. They've got everything wrong. I mean, what do they ever get right? What's the one thing you can name? Is there anything? I can't find anything. Not one thing they've got right. And yet there was the Premier again today talking endlessly without answering any actual questions, insisting that everything was not just fine, but perfect. Until, of course, we discover tomorrow it's not. He said that hotel quarantine was working well. Well, it wasn't. And 99% of the second wave cases and the 700 plus deaths were all traced to that one failure. Today there's now a Supreme Court class action underway, and if it succeeds, it will cost Victorian taxpayers more millions. Andrews said that contact tracing in Victoria was world class, until he had to send people to Sydney to learn how to do it. He insisted that all the protests had been treated equally, despite the obvious double standards in police treatment of Black Lives Matter protesters versus people shopping in a market and those unhappy with his own lockdowns. He claimed that the extended lockdown was absolutely necessary because the expert modelling gave him no choice, until the experts who'd done the modelling disowned the policy. He insisted that the curfew was based on expert health advice, until the Chief Health Officer said, nothing to do with me. Then he said that the curfew was based on police advice, until the Police Commissioner said this.
Were police consulted about the introduction of a curfew?
No.
Were you at no stage?
No. The reality is I was never consulted. I've made inquiries to determine if anyone within the organisation was briefed on the matter, and as best as I can work out, our policy area was provided a copy of the proposed guidelines for our information a couple of hours before they were signed off.
As the Victorian Premier sees it, he's all that stands between Victorians and virus Armageddon. But that doesn't give him the right to insist that black is white and to claim that he's always told the truth when plainly he hasn't. Again and again, he's insisted that Victoria was never offered military support to run its hotel quarantine, even though the Defence Minister said it's always been on the table. The PM, the Prime Minister, offered it publicly time and time again. And even Victorian officials were on the record saying it was needed, but that was of course dismissed before the first hotel doors even opened. And today this email from the head of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to the head of the Victorian Premier's Department talking about the provision of ADF personnel and saying, and I quote, "I'm sure the Commonwealth would be willing to assist Victoria in a similar way." Now, I mean, this bloke running Victoria is like no leader I've ever seen. When the facts contradict the Premier, he just asserts his right. Look at this exchange today with the Australian's Rachel Baxendale.
So last month you told the Public Accounts and Estimates Committee that it's fundamentally incorrect to assert that there was hundreds of ADF staff on offer to Victoria and that somehow someone said no. Do you stand by that statement?
Yes, I do. My statements have been accurate and I will be assisting the inquiry next week.
That appears to contradict the evidence that we heard yesterday. We heard that the Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Phil Gaetjens, wrote to your departmental secretary, Chris Eccles, in an email entitled "Assistance re Hotel Security," and he said that he was sure the Commonwealth would be willing to assist Victoria with ADF personnel if Victoria wanted to quote-unquote reconsider its operating model. Mr Eccles replied to that email saying, "Thanks, Phil." In light of that, who's right about this? Why does your statement appear to contradict that?
Well, all I can say, Rachel, is that the statements I've made are accurate.
He insists his statements are accurate when clearly they're not. And then he changes the subject. And then he says that it's all a matter for his underpowered inquiry. Misleading the Parliament is about the one surefire sacking offence still left in public life. Only Andrews can't mislead the Parliament because he's done his best to shut it down for months and months and months. I'm reminded of the old line about one-time US President Lyndon Johnson. When he tugs his ear, that's the truth. When he rubs his nose, that's the truth. But when he opens his mouth, he's lying. It's a sad indictment on our democracy, isn't it, to have one of Australia's worst public policy catastrophes in our history that no one will apologise for and which no one yet is big enough to take responsibility for. It should be the Premier. But honestly, this bloke couldn't even lie straight in bed. The Victorian people are owed a royal commission and an early election.